Everyone told her the frozen river was where hope disappeared. But she stepped onto the ice anyway, because 12 lives were waiting for someone to care. The northern winds of Frostvale Valley carried that warning through the empty fields, but Lillian Parker had already made her decision. The storm had covered the mountains in white, turning the landscape into a world of silence and cold. Most villagers had already returned home, locking their doors and staying close to their fireplaces. But Lillian stood at the edge of the frozen river, staring at the dark water beneath the ice. She could hear them. Faint cries. 12 giant wolves trapped in the freezing current, unable to reach the shore. Everyone who saw them from a distance had stepped back in fear. They called them dangerous. They called them creatures that should be left alone. But Lillian did not see monsters. She saw lives struggling to survive. Lillian was an Omega from a small village near the northern border of Silvermoon Kingdom. She had grown up hearing what people believed about Omegas like her. Too gentle to lead. Too ordinary to matter. Too weak to change anything. She knew those words because she had heard them her entire life. But she also knew something else. A person's value was not decided by the opinions of others. It was decided by the choices they made when nobody was watching. Taking a deep breath, Lillian stepped closer to the frozen river. The cold air burned against her skin, and every step required courage. She had no special equipment. No powerful family behind her. No one waiting to reward her. She only carried a simple rope and the determination to help. Slowly, carefully, she reached the first wolf. It was larger than any animal she had ever seen, with thick silver fur and eyes that watched her with surprise. Lillian moved gently, speaking in a calm voice. "I am not here to hurt you. I am here to bring you home." One by one, she worked to guide the wolves away from the freezing water. Each rescue took patience. Each moment tested her strength. The villagers watching from a distance could not understand what they were seeing. They had expected an Omega to run away. Instead, they watched her return again and again. After the first wolf. After the 5th. After the 8th. Even when her hands grew cold and her energy began to fade, Lillian continued. She did not think about recognition. She did not think about how people would remember her. She only thought about the lives in front of her. Hours passed beneath the gray winter sky. 11 wolves were finally safe. But then Lillian looked back toward the river and saw the last one. The largest of them all. It remained farther away, watching quietly. There was something different about this wolf. Something in its eyes felt almost human, as if it understood every word she said. Lillian did not know why this one seemed different. She did not know that the final wolf carried a secret hidden from the entire kingdom. She did not know that beneath the silver fur was not an ordinary creature, but the ruler of Silvermoon himself. The Alpha King Ethan Blackwood had vanished during a journey beyond the northern mountains, and the kingdom had been searching for him. But the person who found him was not a warrior. Not a noble. Not someone seeking power. It was an Omega who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. As Lillian stepped onto the ice one more time, she looked toward the final wolf and whispered, "You are not being left behind." And in that moment, the Alpha King discovered something he had never expected. The person coming to save him was the one person in the entire kingdom who had never cared about his crown. The frozen river had become a place of impossible choices. For most people in Frostvale Valley, the safest decision would have been to walk away. But Lillian Parker had never been someone who measured kindness by convenience. She stood on the ice once again, facing the final wolf that remained trapped beneath the winter sky. The creature watched her carefully, its silver eyes filled with a strange calmness. Lillian could feel how different this wolf was from the others. It did not seem afraid. It seemed as if it understood her. "You have been waiting for someone too, haven't you?" she whispered. The wolf remained still, but something in its expression changed. Lillian did not know that beneath the silver fur was Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King of Silvermoon Kingdom. During his journey through the northern mountains, Ethan had been separated from his royal guards and found himself in a situation where he could no longer continue alone. The ancient bond between his human form and his wolf spirit had hidden his identity, leaving him unseen by the very people searching for him. But now, standing before him was someone who had no reason to help. Someone who had no knowledge of his crown. Someone who saw only a life in need. Lillian carefully moved closer. The ice beneath her feet was cold, but she ignored the discomfort. Her focus remained on the wolf in front of her. "I know you are tired," she said softly. "But we are almost there." Ethan had heard countless voices throughout his life. Advisors. Nobles. Leaders from distant lands. Many spoke because they wanted something from him. But Lillian's voice was different. There was no hidden purpose behind her words. There was only genuine concern. With patience and determination, Lillian guided the final wolf toward safety. When she finally reached the shore, the villagers who had been watching stood in silence. They had expected fear. They had expected hesitation. Instead, they witnessed an Omega showing a level of courage they had never imagined. As the wolves rested safely beneath the trees, Lillian finally allowed herself to breathe. She looked exhausted, but she smiled when she saw all 12 creatures together. "You are safe now," she said. That was the only thing that mattered to her. Moments later, distant voices echoed through the valley. Riders from Silvermoon Kingdom had arrived, searching desperately for the missing Alpha King. Lillian turned toward them with confusion. She did not understand why so many royal guards were coming toward the wolves. She only knew that help had finally arrived. The guards approached carefully, and their expressions changed when they saw the final wolf. They immediately recognized the royal mark hidden beneath its silver fur. The atmosphere shifted. The animal Lillian had just rescued was not an ordinary wolf. It was the one the entire kingdom had been searching for. The Alpha King. But before anyone could explain, Lillian looked toward the wolf with the same gentle expression she had shown from the beginning. She did not bow because of his title. She did not change because of his power. She simply asked, "Are you feeling better now?" The guards were stunned. Nobody spoke to the Alpha King that way. Not because it was disrespectful, but because everyone usually saw the crown before they saw the person. Ethan felt something unfamiliar in that moment. Respect from others was something he had known his entire life. But being cared for without expectations was something completely different. As the royal escort prepared to return to the palace, Ethan looked back at the Omega who had saved him. He knew the kingdom would soon learn what happened in the frozen valley. But he also knew one thing before anyone else did. The woman who pulled 12 wolves from the ice had no idea that she had changed the fate of an entire kingdom. The journey back to Silvermoon Kingdom was unlike anything Lillian Parker had ever experienced. She had walked into the frozen valley as an ordinary Omega from a small northern village. Now she traveled beside royal guards, surrounded by questions she could not answer. She still did not fully understand why everyone looked at the final wolf with such respect. To her, he was simply another life that needed help. As the group moved through the snowy mountains, Lillian stayed close to the wolves she had rescued. She checked on each one, making sure they were comfortable after their difficult journey. The guards watched her quietly. They had expected someone who would be nervous around the royal creatures. Instead, they saw a young woman who treated them with the same kindness she had shown from the beginning. One of the guards finally asked, "Were you not afraid?" Lillian looked at him with confusion. Of what? Of helping them. She glanced toward the wolves and smiled gently. They were afraid too. I thought they needed someone who would not be afraid of them. The guard had no answer. Her words were simple, but they carried a meaning he had never considered. When they reached Silvermoon Palace, the entire kingdom reacted with surprise. The missing Alpha King had returned. The 12 royal wolves had been found. But the greatest mystery was the person who had discovered them. Everyone wanted to know who the Omega was who had entered the frozen valley alone and brought them back. Lillian felt uncomfortable with the attention. She had never wanted recognition. She had never imagined standing inside the palace walls. The beautiful halls, the royal banners, and the endless rooms reminded her how different her life was from the world she had suddenly entered. Meanwhile, Ethan Blackwood had returned to his human form. As the Alpha King stood before his advisors, he listened as they discussed the events of the Frozen Valley. Many praised the rescue. Many focused on the return of the royal wolves. But Ethan could only think about one person. The Omega who had looked at him without fear. The Omega who had not cared about his title. The Omega who had asked if he was feeling better before asking anything about herself. That moment stayed with him. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered what it felt like to be seen as more than a king. Later that evening, Ethan requested to speak with Lillian privately in the palace gardens. The winter air was peaceful, and the quiet surroundings gave them a chance to talk away from the crowd. "You know who I am now," Ethan said. Lillian nodded. "Yes. You are the Alpha King." He watched carefully, waiting for her reaction. But she simply smiled. "I am glad you are safe." Those words surprised him. "That is all?" he asked. Lillian looked confused. "What else should I say?" Ethan almost smiled. Most people reacted to his position before anything else. They saw the crown, the authority, and the power. Lillian saw the person. "You saved my life without knowing who I was," Ethan said quietly. "I only helped someone who needed it," Lillian replied. Her answer was exactly what he expected and yet still amazed him. She did not see her actions as heroic. She did not think she had done anything extraordinary. She simply believed that every life mattered. As Ethan looked at her, the ancient instinct within him became calm. The beast that carried the strength of every alpha before him recognized something rare. Not power. Not ambition. Something much deeper. A heart that remained gentle in a world that had taught her to be guarded. And while the kingdom prepared to celebrate the return of their king, Ethan realized the greatest discovery of his journey was not hidden in the frozen mountains. It was standing in front of him, unaware of the destiny that had already begun to unfold. The days following Ethan Blackwood's return to Silvermoon Kingdom brought a change that no one in the palace expected. The Alpha King had returned safely, the royal wolves were home, and the kingdom had every reason to celebrate. Yet the person everyone wanted to understand was not the king himself. It was the Omega who had walked into a frozen valley and changed the future without realizing it. Lillian Parker found herself surrounded by a world she had only heard about in stories. The grand halls of Silvermoon Palace were beautiful, but they also reminded her that she did not belong to this place. She was a village girl who had spent her life helping neighbors, caring for animals, and living quietly. She had never imagined standing beside the throne. She had never dreamed that anyone important would know her name. But Ethan noticed something about her that others overlooked. Even inside the palace, where everyone treated her differently, Lillian remained the same person. She thanked every servant who helped her. She asked about the guards who protected the kingdom. She continued checking on the 12 wolves every morning before thinking about herself. Ethan watched from a distance, realizing that kindness was not something she showed only when people were watching. It was part of who she was. However, not everyone in Silvermoon welcomed her arrival. Some members of the royal court questioned why an Omega with no noble background was being given attention by the Alpha King. They believed her actions in the Frozen Valley were admirable, but they struggled to accept that someone like her could stand near the royal family. Lillian heard the whispers, but she did not allow them to change her. She had lived with judgment for years. She understood that people often feared what they did not understand. One afternoon, Ethan found her in the palace garden, carefully placing fresh water near the wolves' resting area. "You know, many people still do not understand you," he said. Lillian looked up calmly. "I know. Does that hurt?" Ethan asked. She paused before answering. "Sometimes. But I have learned that I cannot control what people see. I can only control what I choose to show them." Her response stayed with him. Ethan had spent his life learning how to control kingdoms, decisions, and responsibilities. Yet Lillian had mastered something he had never truly understood. The ability to remain peaceful even when the world misunderstood her. As the days passed, Ethan began spending more time with Lillian. He wanted to understand the person behind the courage everyone was talking about. He discovered that her kindness came from her own experiences. She knew what it felt like to be ignored. She knew what it felt like to be judged before anyone learned her story. And because of that, she refused to make others feel the same way. One evening, Ethan asked her a question that surprised her. If you had known the wolves belonged to the royal family, would you still have saved them? Lillian looked at him and answered without hesitation. Yes. Why? He asked. She smiled softly. Because they needed help before they became important. Those words reached deeper than she realized. Ethan had spent his life surrounded by people who valued him because of his title. But Lillian had cared for him before she knew his name. Before she knew his power. Before she knew his crown. The beast inside Ethan grew quiet as he stood beside her. It had always searched for strength, but now it recognized something greater. It recognized a person whose heart remained gentle despite everything she had endured. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if destiny had not brought him to the frozen river to be rescued. Perhaps destiny had brought him there so he could finally find someone who saw him for who he truly was. The presence of Lillian Parker continued to change Silvermoon Palace in ways no one expected. She had arrived as a stranger from a small northern village, someone most people would have ignored without a second thought. But day by day, the kingdom began to notice the qualities that had always been within her. She was not trying to become important. She was not trying to gain influence. She was simply living according to the same values that had guided her when she stepped onto the frozen river. Ethan Blackwood saw this more clearly than anyone. As the Alpha King, he had spent years surrounded by people who carefully chose their words around him. Many respected the crown, but few truly understood the person behind it. Lillian was different. She spoke to him with honesty. She questioned him when she believed something could be better. She treated him with the same kindness she showed everyone else. One morning, Ethan invited Lillian to walk through the royal archives. He wanted to show her something that had been kept within the palace for generations. Inside the ancient halls were records of past Alpha Kings and the traditions that shaped Silvermoon Kingdom. Lillian looked around with curiosity, amazed by the history surrounding her. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Ethan looked at the old books and replied, "Because I spent my entire life learning about what makes a great ruler. But I never learned what makes a great heart." Lillian smiled gently. "And you think I know?" "I think you have shown me," Ethan answered. His words surprised her. She had never considered herself someone who could teach a king anything. But Ethan understood that wisdom did not always come from experience, power, or status. Sometimes it came from someone who had learned compassion through hardship. However, the royal council continued to struggle with the changes happening within the palace. Some members believed the Alpha King was allowing personal feelings to influence his decisions. They questioned whether an Omega from a village could truly understand royal responsibility. Ethan listened to their concerns, but he also remembered the frozen river. He remembered the person who had given everything she had to save lives without knowing who they belonged to. A person's value cannot be measured by their family name, Ethan told the council. It must be measured by their actions. Those words marked a turning point in the kingdom. For the first time, many people began questioning the beliefs they had accepted for generations. They started seeing that kindness and courage could exist in anyone, regardless of their place in society. Meanwhile, Lillian remained unaware of how much she had changed the way people thought. She still worried about whether she was helping enough. She still wondered if she truly belonged in a palace. One evening, Ethan found her sitting near the wolves she had rescued. They were peaceful now, no longer the frightened creatures she discovered in the frozen water. "You still think you do not belong here," Ethan said quietly. Lillian looked at him. "Sometimes." "Why?" he asked. She looked toward the palace lights. Because this world is so different from mine. Everyone here knows exactly where they stand. I am still trying to understand where I fit. Ethan stepped closer and answered honestly. Maybe you were never meant to fit into the old ways. Lillian looked at him with surprise. Then what was I meant for? Ethan smiled softly. Maybe you were meant to help create something new. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The snow fell gently around the palace gardens, reminding them of the day their paths first crossed. Ethan had once believed destiny was something written only for kings and powerful families. But now he understood that destiny could begin with a simple act of kindness from someone the world had overlooked. And as the kingdom slowly changed, a greater truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Omega who saved 12 wolves was not only changing Silvermoon Kingdom. She was changing the heart of its Alpha King. The changes within Silvermoon Kingdom continued quietly, but their impact grew stronger with each passing day. The people were beginning to see that the future of their kingdom could not be built only on old traditions. They were learning that wisdom could come from unexpected places, and that someone's heart could be just as important as their position. At the center of this change was Lillian Parker, the Omega who never intended to become a symbol of anything. She still spent her mornings caring for the 12 wolves she had rescued. She still walked through the palace gardens without seeking attention. She still believed that helping others was simply something everyone should do. But Ethan Blackwood understood that what made her special was exactly the fact that she did not realize it. One afternoon, Ethan invited Lillian to visit the northern village where she had lived before coming to the palace. He wanted her to see how much had changed since the day she left. As they traveled through the snowy fields, Lillian noticed the difference immediately. People who once ignored her now greeted her with respect. Families who once looked away now smiled and welcomed her. Yet Lillian did not act as if she had won anything. She simply thanked them and asked how their lives were going. Ethan watched her carefully. "You do not realize what you have done, do you?" he asked. Lillian looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "You changed how people see each other." She looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I only helped when I could." Ethan smiled. "That is exactly why it matters." When they reached the village, Lillian visited the places that had once felt like home. She remembered the days when she wondered if she would ever be accepted. She remembered feeling invisible. But standing there now, she realized something important. She did not need the approval of everyone to know her worth. She had always carried that value within herself. Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own challenges inside the palace. Some members of the council worried that the kingdom was changing too quickly. They feared that accepting new ideas meant abandoning their history. Ethan understood their concerns, but he also knew that protecting tradition did not mean refusing growth. A kingdom survives because it learns, he told them. Not because it refuses to change. His words reflected the lesson Lillian had taught him. Strength was not about holding on to control. Strength was knowing when to listen. That evening, Ethan and Lillian stood outside beneath the stars. The quiet sky reminded them of the frozen valley where everything began. "Do you ever regret saving those wolves?" Ethan asked. Lillian immediately shook her head. "Never. Even knowing how much your life changed afterward?" She smiled softly. "My life changed because I made a choice I believed was right. I would make that choice again." Ethan looked at her with admiration. He had met countless people who wanted power, recognition, or influence. But Lillian had received all three without ever asking for them. The beast inside him remained calm, no longer searching for someone powerful enough to stand beside an alpha king. It had found someone with a different kind of strength. Someone who could remind him who he was beyond the crown. As the moonlight covered Silvermoon Kingdom, Ethan realized that the greatest decision of his life would not be made in a throne room or a council meeting. It would be made with the person who had shown him that true leadership began with compassion. And soon, the entire kingdom would learn the choice the Alpha King was ready to make. The moment Ethan Blackwood had been preparing for finally arrived. The entire Silvermoon Kingdom gathered beneath the royal banners, waiting to hear the decision of their Alpha King. For generations, the crown had followed traditions that valued bloodlines, alliances, and status above all else. But Ethan had learned something during his journey through the frozen valley. A kingdom could not become stronger by ignoring the hearts of the people who lived within it. Lillian Parker stood among the crowd, still unsure why everyone was looking at her with such attention. She had never wanted a place in history. She had never dreamed of standing beside the throne. She only remembered a cold river, 12 frightened wolves, and the simple belief that every life deserved a chance. Ethan looked across the gathering and saw the same person he had first met on the ice. She was not changed by the palace. She was not changed by the respect she received. She remained the Omega who chose compassion before recognition. Before the kingdom, Ethan spoke openly about the events that had changed Silvermoon forever. He did not focus on his own return or the royal wolves. Instead, he spoke about the person who reminded him what leadership truly meant. Many believe strength comes from having the power to command, Ethan said. But I have learned that true strength comes from having the courage to care when there is nothing to gain. The crowd listened carefully. Many remembered the Omega they once overlooked. They remembered how quickly they judged her without knowing her story. But now they understood that the woman before them had shown a kind of courage that could not be taught in royal halls. After the ceremony, Ethan and Lillian walked through the palace gardens. The same gardens where they had shared quiet conversations and discovered more about each other. "Are you certain about this?" Lillian asked softly. Ethan looked at her. "About what?" "About changing everything." For a moment, Ethan was silent. Then he smiled. "I am not changing everything. I am allowing the kingdom to become what it should have been all along." Lillian looked at the snow-covered path beneath their feet. "I never wanted to create problems." Ethan shook his head gently. "You did not create problems. You revealed the ones that were already there." Those words stayed with her. She had spent years believing she was too ordinary to matter. She had believed the world would always see her as someone less important. But the journey had shown her something different. A person did not need a title to have value. A person did not need power to make a difference. Meanwhile, the 12 wolves she rescued rested peacefully in the royal gardens. They had become a reminder of the day everything changed. A reminder that one small act of kindness could reach farther than anyone imagined. Ethan stood beside Lillian, no longer seeing her as someone he needed to protect. He saw her as someone who walked beside him. The beast inside him had recognized this truth long before he understood it. It had never been searching for someone who could match his power. It had been searching for someone who could balance it with compassion. As the stars appeared above Silvermoon Kingdom, the people began to understand that their Alpha King had not chosen someone because of her status. He had chosen her because she showed them a truth they had forgotten. The strongest hearts are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones that quietly choose kindness when the entire world expects them to turn away. The days after Ethan Blackwood's announcement brought a new feeling to Silvermoon Kingdom. The palace that once felt distant and divided slowly became a place where people began to understand one another. The changes did not happen overnight, but every small moment showed that the kingdom was moving in a new direction. At the center of this transformation was Lillian Parker, the Omega who never believed she had done anything extraordinary. She continued her days with the same quiet kindness that had guided her from the beginning. She visited the royal wolves, helped the palace workers, and listened to anyone who needed someone to understand them. She did not see herself as a symbol. She simply believed that everyone deserved compassion. Ethan admired that more than anything. As the Alpha King, he had spent years carrying responsibilities that few people could understand. He had always believed that being strong meant standing alone and making every difficult decision himself. But Lillian had shown him another kind of strength. She had shown him that accepting support did not make someone weaker. It made them more complete. One evening, Ethan and Lillian stood together near the frozen river where their story had begun. The ice had melted, and the water flowed peacefully beneath the evening sky. It was difficult to imagine that this quiet place had once been where everything changed. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" Ethan asked. Lillian smiled. "I remember thinking you needed help." Ethan laughed softly. "Even when you did not know who I was." "Especially then," she replied. Her answer reminded him why she was different. Lillian had never been impressed by the crown. She had never looked at him and seen only the Alpha King. She had seen a life that needed saving. That was something he would never forget. As they stood beside the river, Ethan shared something he had never told anyone. "Before I met you, I thought destiny was something only written for people like me. Kings. Alphas. Those born with power." Lillian looked at him. "And now?" Ethan looked toward the flowing water. "Now I believe destiny can belong to anyone who chooses to make the right decision when the moment arrives." His words reflected everything he had learned. The kingdom had changed because one person chose kindness in a moment when nobody expected it. Meanwhile, the people of Silvermoon continued to tell the story of the frozen river. Parents shared it with their children. Travelers carried it beyond the kingdom's borders. It became a reminder that courage did not always appear in grand battles or powerful speeches. Sometimes courage was a person stepping forward when everyone else stepped away. The 12 wolves became a symbol of hope throughout the land. They reminded everyone that compassion could create connections between those who seemed completely different. Lillian often visited them and remembered the day she first heard their cries beneath the ice. She still found it hard to believe how much had changed since then. She had entered the frozen valley believing she was saving 12 lives. She never imagined that those 12 lives would lead her to a new home, a new purpose, and a person who saw her true worth. Ethan watched her from the palace balcony that night, knowing his life would never be the same. He had once searched for strength and power and control. Now he understood that the greatest strength was found in trust, kindness, and the courage to open one's heart. But as Silvermoon prepared for a new era, one final step remained. The kingdom had accepted the lesson Lillian taught them. Now Ethan had to make a choice that would define not only his reign, but the future they would build together. The final choice Ethan Blackwood made was not about changing an old tradition. It was about creating a future where people were valued for who they truly were. On the day Silvermoon Kingdom gathered beneath the royal banners, everyone understood that this moment would be remembered for generations. The Alpha King stood before his people, but this time he was not only speaking as a ruler. He was speaking as someone whose life had been completely changed by a single act of kindness. Ethan looked across the crowd and saw Lillian Parker standing quietly among them. She still carried the same gentle expression she had when he first met her beside the frozen river. She had no desire for attention. She had never asked for a place beside the throne. Yet she had become the person who reminded an entire kingdom what true strength meant. "For many years, we believed strength belonged only to those who had power," Ethan said. "We believed importance came from titles and family names. But one person showed us that the greatest strength can come from a heart willing to care when there is nothing to gain." The people listened carefully. They remembered the Omega who walked into the freezing storm when everyone else stepped away. They remembered the woman who rescued 12 wolves without knowing one of them carried the crown of Silvermoon. They remembered the person who proved that kindness was not weakness. It was courage. Ethan then turned toward Lillian. "You changed this kingdom without ever trying to rule it," he said. "You reminded us that leadership begins with compassion." Lillian felt the emotion of the moment, but she remained humble. She looked at the people before her and thought about the day she had stood alone beside the frozen river. She had only wanted to help. She had never imagined that one choice would create a new future for an entire kingdom. After the gathering, Ethan and Lillian returned to the place where their journey began. The frozen river was peaceful now, reflecting the evening sky. The cold wind that once surrounded them had become a quiet memory. "Everything changed here," Ethan said. Lillian smiled. "Because you were found?" Ethan shook his head. "Because I found you." Lillian looked at him quietly. I was just helping. That is what makes it meaningful, Ethan replied. You never helped because you wanted something. You helped because it was right. Those words reminded Lillian of everything she had learned. She once believed being overlooked meant she was unimportant. She once believed her gentle nature was something the world would never value. But she discovered that the qualities people underestimated were the very things that changed everything. Years passed, and the story of the Omega who saved 12 wolves continued throughout Silvermoon Kingdom. Children learned that courage did not always come from strength. Leaders learned that listening was just as important as commanding. And those who felt unseen learned that their value existed long before anyone recognized it. Ethan remained the Alpha King, but he was no longer the same ruler who believed he had to carry everything alone. With Lillian beside him, he led with understanding and compassion. The beast within him had found peace because it had discovered what it had truly been searching for. Not someone who matched his power, but someone who balanced it with kindness. The journey that began with 12 wolves trapped in freezing water became a story of hope, destiny, and a love built on seeing the person behind the title. Lillian Parker was never remembered because she saved an Alpha King. She was remembered because she showed an entire kingdom that even the smallest act of kindness could change the world forever.